In this video, we're going to continue talking about methods in JavaScript, but instead of creating and running methods that we've written, we're going to focus on exploring some methods made available to us by JavaScript itself. So in the last video, we created some data. The data modeled a restaurant, and all of the methods we created worked with that restaurant data. In this video, we're going to explore the string and all of the methods available to us to work with the string data. Imagine, for example, we're trying to validate a user's password, and we want to make sure that its length is greater than 8 and that it doesn't contain the word password. Right now, we don't have a way to do that, but with string methods and properties, we'll be able to do just that and more. I'm going to create a new file in the objects folder, and I'll call this one string methods.js. And in here, we're going to start off by adding a string. We needed some string data to work with. Let's make a new string, and we'll just store our name inside of there, something simple. We'll keep the string simple since what we're going to explore can be a little complex. The first thing we're going to do is explore a property on our strings called length. And as the name suggests, it returns the length of the string as a number. So in my case, how long is this string? We got 6 plus 4 plus the space for a total of 11. Let's go ahead and figure out how we can figure out the string length. Right here, length property. And down below, first up, we have to reference the string. So we have that stored under the name variable. And then we have to access its length property. So we use dot notation, dot length to get the property. It's not a method, so we don't add parentheses on there. It's a property. So we just grab the data, much like we grabbed the data over here, using something like this dot guessed capacity. Now, at this point in time, yes, we are getting the length, but we're not doing anything with it. Let's go ahead and dump it to the terminal. I'm going to add a closing parenthesis at the end, and up front, I will toss console.log with the opening parenthesis. Now we should be able to save the file, run it, and actually get something meaningful printing. Over in the terminal, I'm going to run this new file. That is node string-methods.js, and when I run it, what do I get? I get the number 11 printing right here. If I were to change my name, removing my last name, save the file and rerun it, I would see the new length, which is 6. So using the length property, we'll be able to do things like validate a user's password. Does the password contain 9 or more characters, for example? Now that we've seen one of the properties, let's explore one of the methods. Down below, I am going to add Mead back on, and we're going to figure out how we can convert all of the characters in our string to uppercase. To do this, we use a method right here, convert to uppercase. I'll show you where the documentation lives for all of this in just a second, but down below, what we're going to do is access this method. It is name dot, since we're accessing something on our string, and this method is called to upper, capital U, case, capital C. Now this is not a property, it's a method, so we have to call it as such, and it doesn't take any arguments. All it does is it takes your string, it converts it to uppercase, and it returns that as the return value. So it's not going to change the name variable, it's just going to give us a new string that we could store, or in our case, we could just print it to the screen. So right here, closing parenthesis, and up front, console.log parenthesis. I'm going to save the file and rerun things. And what do I get? I get a length of 11, which is correct, and I get Andrew Mead being screamed at me from the terminal. So this is just a quick preview of how we can use string methods and properties. Before we go any further though, I want to make you aware of where the documentation lives for all of this because it's super important. Now, I believe the documentation is really essential for learning a language. Getting comfortable with it is going to allow you to explore all of the features available. But at this point in the course, it's also going to open up some questions because some things you'll see in the documentation won't make sense yet since we're not done with the course and we haven't explored all of the features of the language. So let's keep that in mind as we explore the documentation. While some things will be clear, others will be a little bit blurry. To find the documentation for the string, we're going to go over to Google and search MDN, which stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. It's the best set of documentation for JavaScript. And then I'm going to toss string on the end. And this should get me to the right place. We're looking for the string page at the developer.mozilla.org website. Down below, you can see some other methods available to us that we'll explore later, but for now, we can just go to the main page. The main page is going to contain some information about the string in general. And if we look at the examples over here, we can see they're creating a string just like we've done in the course. We got single quotes, we got double quotes like we've talked about. What I want to focus on this page is what's on the left-hand side. Under properties, we can see one of the properties we've already explored, the length property, and under methods, we have a list of all of the methods available to us, and you can see that that list is pretty extensive. If we scroll down a ways, down to T, we can see the one we just used, to uppercase. And if we actually click this method, it'll take us over to the method documentation where we can see how we use it. We call to uppercase on a string, we pass in no arguments, and then it talks about what comes back. A new string representing the calling string converted to uppercase. So being able to navigate the documentation is going to go a long way towards actually remembering how things work. You're not going to remember all of the methods we talk about in the course, but if you can navigate the documentation, you'll be able to find them and jog your memory in just a few moments. Now we're going to use the alternative to uppercase, which is to lowercase. This does exactly what it suggests. We could click over there if we wanted to, but let's just switch back to the terminal and Visual Studio Code to test things out. Right here, convert to lowercase, and this one is super easy. We are going to use console.log to print something, and much like the method up above, it is just our string dot to lowercase. And the case of the method does matter. So you got to make sure to match up the casing correctly with the documentation. Otherwise, the method isn't going to exist and you're going to get an error when you try to run your script. We can save this. I can run things over from the terminal, and you can see now we have things in lowercase, the A and the M being in lowercase as well, even though they weren't in the original string. Now, these are all great, but they're not the most interesting methods in the world. One that is super useful is the includes method. We can explore that in the documentation as well. We scroll up to I. Up here, we have includes sitting right here, and we could even click over to the documentation for this one to take a look at some documentation for a method that actually does take arguments. So right here, we can see the includes call syntax. On a string, we call includes, and then it's talking about the potential arguments, and down below, it actually lists out what they are and what they expect. So the first one, a string to be searched for within this string. So imagine I have the password, it contains the characters ABC123, password 098, and I want to see if it contains the string password, which it does. We could use the includes method to get a Boolean back, true if it includes it and false otherwise. Now you can see down below exactly what I just said. Let's go ahead and mess around with this one over in Visual Studio Code. Over here, let's create that password. First includes method. Let password equal, I'll call this one ABC123 password 098. And then down below, we're going to use the includes method. That is password, our string, dot includes to access the method, and then we're going to go ahead and pass in the argument it expects. The second argument isn't really necessary in this case, but the first one is required. It's the thing we're searching for. Let's say we want to make sure the user has a strong password by not having password directly inside of it. So we're going to see if it does. This will return true if it contains it, which it does, and false otherwise. Let's go ahead and log this value to the screen. Console.log. I'm going to switch over to the terminal after saving things and rerun the script. What do I get? I get true printing, letting me know that the password probably contains things that it shouldn't, and we will be able to get this information back to the user and tell them to enter a stronger password. If we were to change the password to something else, let's go ahead and get rid of password and replace it with some random characters, and then rerun the script. This time around, we would get false, since the original string right here doesn't contain this string inside of it. So now that we've seen the includes method, there's just one more method I want to explore to give us a taste of what we can do inside of strings. Down below, this method is called trim. The trim method allows us to remove extra white space from a string. So imagine we have a form in the web, something we'll have later. and the user enters their name, but they accidentally had a few spaces before or after it. Now these spaces can be hard to see in the form, especially if it's after it. They're basically impossible to see in the web browser. But if we were to save this data, we really wouldn't want to save it with those strings on either end. So what do? Well, we can trim out all of that extra space using the trim method. Once again, we can explore this in the documentation to figure out how it works. We scroll down to the list, get into T. Down here, we have trim. We click it, and we can figure out exactly what it does. So here we see another method which doesn't take any arguments. We just call it, and it does something. What does it do? It returns a new string, representing the calling string stripped of white space from both ends, both the beginning and the end. Let's actually use it and see if it works as advertised. I'm going to switch over to the terminal, over to VSC, and I'm going to call this method console.log. And in this case, I'm going to go back up to the name string as opposed to the password string. That is name dot, right here, trim, calling it as a method, but with no arguments since it takes none. Then I can save the file, switch over to the terminal, run things, and what do I get? Right here, you can see I get the string with the spaces on both ends, but after I trim it, you can see that the extra spaces have been removed. So this is really useful when it comes to sanitizing data that users enter. So when a user enters data, we want to make sure it is correct. One of the things we'll be doing is removing those white spaces. So obviously there are other methods available to us. On that list, we got about a dozen we haven't explored, and we will get to most of those, but these are some of the quick hitters that are going to allow us to figure out exactly why using something like built-in methods would be useful. It allows us to do things we couldn't otherwise do. Now that we've taken a quick peek at these methods, I want you to use a couple of these together to create something meaningful. It's going to be your job down below, and I'll create a little challenge area just for you. What I'd like you to create is a function called isValidPassword. And as the name suggests, this is going to be a function that validates a password. So it'll take a single argument, the string password, to validate, and it'll return true if a password is valid and false otherwise. Now, what criteria are we going to use? Well, what I'd like you to do is only return true if the length is more than 8. So 9 characters or greater, and it doesn't contain the word password. If it meets both of those standards, then we can return true. If it doesn't, then I'd like you to go ahead and return false. Down below, I'll give you some example usages. Console.log. We'll call this new function isValidPassword, and we'll pass in the string we're trying to validate. For this one, let's say it doesn't meet that length criteria. I'll just put in a few characters. Then we can duplicate this line a couple more times. For this one, let's go ahead and say that it is a valid password. Let's use ABC123 with a couple of special characters. And then for the last one, we'll have a nice long password, but we'll say it does contain the word password. So here we have 3 situations. This one will fail because of the length. This one will pass because it's valid. This one will fail because it contains the word password. So to know if you got it right, you should see true, false, and then true. Take as much time as you need to knock this one out and use what you learned up above to get it done. You're going to have to combine 2 of those and then test your work. Make sure that if you actually run the file, you get the expected results. Pause the video, and when you're done, come back and click play. All right, how'd that one go? Hopefully you were able to knock that out without too much trouble. I'm going to start by making our new function. Let isValidPassword equal a new function. Does it take an argument? Yes, it does. It takes the password. I'm going to call this password. Now inside of the function body, we're trying to do a couple of things. First, we're trying to validate the length, and then we are trying to check if it contains the word password. There are a ton of different ways you could have got this done. Let's go over a couple. Well, let's start off with a solution that uses an if statement. So if, and then right here, we're going to add our 2 conditions. The first one, we want to make sure the password.length is greater than 8, so 9 or more. And so we're going to use the logical AND operator. We want to make sure it doesn't include the string password. So we're going to use password.includes to check that. I'm going to pass in as the one and only argument the string we're looking for, password. Now we'll notice that this is going to be the opposite of what we want. This is only going to return true when the string is in there. We want it to only return true when it's not there. So as we explored previously, we can use the logical not operator to flip that Boolean. Now we have an if statement that's only ever going to run if the password is valid. So what do? We return true. If it's not valid, we can use our else clause right here to return false. And there we have it. This could be one way to tackle the problem. Over in the terminal, we can now rerun the saved file, and what do we get? We get false, true, false, exactly as expected. It is correctly validating our password against those two criteria. I'm going to remove the comment, and we'll explore one more way to get this done. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you have an if statement like this, if condition return Boolean, else return the other Boolean, you can always simplify it. So this right here already resolves to true. So there's no need to have the condition and then return true. We can just return this expression exactly. To prove it, let's take it and cut it out exactly as we had it before and remove the if statement. Then all I'm going to do is return whatever we had. If the password is valid, this will resolve to true. If the password is invalid, this will resolve to false, which we already proved with our if statement solution. So now we can save things, we can rerun it, and we can see that our one-liner function works exactly the same as the other function did. Here we are still getting false for this one, true for this one, and false for the final password. So there we have it. In this video, we took a quick look at the various methods available to us on our string. There are more. We'll explore those as we move through the course and actually need them to solve specific problems. But for now, we have a pretty good taste of exactly what we can do with those methods. And if we want to explore new ones, we have the documentation available to us. That's where we're going to stop for this video. Sorry, this one ran a little long. In the next video, we're going to take a look at some more built-in stuff, but in that one, we'll be focusing on numbers. I'm excited to get to it, so stay tuned, and I'll see you then.